up. So let's just talk a little bit about the agenda, and then we'll jump right in. So first of all, we're going to cover the 5 signs. We'll talk about security policy automation, and then we're going to get into some use cases and how to get started, a little bit about the benefits, and then talk about next steps. So what are the 5 signs? So first of all, we have number 1. Your change processes are slow and they're manual. So the number of changes is expected just to keep growing over time, and it's really going to be hard to keep up. So organizations are already struggling with this, and it's just going to get worse because manual, slow processes, they lead to mistakes and misconfigurations and compromise the network. And without the right level of staffing, changes continue to be slow, and you can't get to the really important tasks that are really needed to improve your security posture. So number 2, there's a lot of organizations who are now going to cloud-first initiatives, and the problem that we're running into is finding visibility into the cloud workload, so what's actually happening in the cloud. You need to be able to see and understand what's taking place, and you need to make sure that the same policies that you're using on-prem are followed in the cloud, and in order to do that, you have to have that visibility into what's happening in the cloud. In multi-cloud environments, which we're seeing, are just only exacerbating the problem. So number 3, so we call this, the business is hopping around you. So with organizations really looking to digitally transform, the business wants to move fast. They want IT teams to keep up, but without security slowing them down. And processes and systems are, starting to evolve without involving the network team or bypassing the network team, leading to shadow IT problems. So when teams are inefficient and they're not meeting their SLAs, they find competition's doing better, and creating, shadow IT is really creating vulnerabilities within the environment. Number 4 is that the hole is, it's just getting deeper. The requests are increasing, and most organizations that we run into, their rule bases are, really a mess. A lot of shadowed rules, redundant rules, unused rules, and overtly permissive rules that are compromising security and also really slowing down the change process. And then there's a need to, redo change requests because they are either unneeded or they're not understood, or they're not following along with security policy. And the problem is just growing bigger. So, the problem here is you really can't manage what you can't see, and you need that, if it's in that hole, you need to be able to provide the visibility. And number 5 is that organizations are really struggling to prove compliance. So, a big factor for organizations is meeting both internal and external compliance mandates. They may have failed an audit. You suffer a big fine. We've all hearing about GDPR and the fines that may be coming with that. So it's a big problem for organizations. But most organizations don't have a fully documented change process. They don't have visibility into why changes were made, when they were made, by who. So the problem with proving compliance is you really can't measure what you can't see. And from here, I'm just going to talk a little bit, about a real-life example. This is from a customer of ours who this is where they started. So they really had a lack of visibility into their network estate. They had many firewalls, thousands of rules, and it was taking them weeks to process changes. And they were really falling further behind and really having trouble getting out of that hole we just talked about. They had, multi-vendor environments. They had outsourced partners they were dealing with, and just didn't have a single source of truth. They were having trouble with those multiple outsourced partners, being on calls and really trying to identify performance issues and what was happening within the network. They had a very manual process, which was being performed by, their technical people. And, they really had no change validation or accountability. And, they discovered that they had some problems. They examined just 600 change requests, and they discovered that, 18% were not required, that 13% required amending because they were partially implemented, and then they had another 8% which just failed the implementation check. So, this is just, I think, very similar to a lot of organizations out there and what they're dealing with. So what's the resistance to automate? So why aren't we automating more? So one is, there's cultural resistance in many organizations towards automation. Some organizations, they fear automation a little bit, fear it may break things, it may, it may take my job, and people are, sometimes afraid of changing the way they do things. They don't have the visibility in order to automate. They think maybe it's too complex. They've tried automating before with scripts, and maybe, some organizations are doing some low-level automation with scripts, but many have failed to, maintain that level of automation, or, they just don't know how to get started. So Hadass, I think you want to maybe talk about, why automation, what's the urgency, and a little bit about security policy.
Sure. Thank you, Karen. So what we see today is that the enterprise networks are fragmented, and we all see that. We have firewalls from various different vendors. We have thousands of routers and switches in large organizations, and we have complex environments. So we have normally a combination of private cloud, public cloud, and various microservices or containers. And all of that creates a very, very complex environment that we need to deal with. But it's not just the infrastructure which is fragmented, it's also the processes and the people. So in today's organizations, we see different teams that handle different parts of the network, and sometimes those teams don't properly communicate with each other. So you'll see secluded teams working in specific areas such as network configuration or security or cloud when there's no real communication between them. And when we look at the future, we realize that the network is going to become even more complex and fragmented because of the combination of the traditional networks, the private and public clouds, containers, microservices, the availability of multi-vendor technologies, the distributed teams that work on different areas of the organization. All of that creates a highly complex environment. So when we look at all of that, what are the best practices to do automation? The first important element is to get buy-in across the board when you start dealing with automation. Network automation needs to be a way of life in your organization. It needs to be baked into the operations team. You need to make sure that your staff is on board with the change and with the new mentality that automation requires. The next tip is to start small with small wins and build on incremental successes. So that you can easily achieve things, but address common pain points. You don't try to enforce an entire automation strategy starting from day one, and don't try too much too fast. And basically, like in a diet, you need to always fight the urge to fall back to manual processes, and this is not an easy task. The third best practice is to define metrics so that you can measure your successes, even the small ones. And then 4 is that you shouldn't expect magic because automation cannot do anything that it isn't explicitly told to do. And it's all about taking your common everyday tasks and making them automatic. And it's a tool to help you, but it does what you tell it to do. And then the 5th tip is to focus on your security policy automation, as this would help you to increase your efficiencies, strengthen your security, and improve your audit readiness. Basically, security automation is a set of automated processes that can help you expedite the day-to-day manual tasks that you have. And it also helps you to minimize vulnerabilities and to maximize your network efficiencies. So let's have a look at some of the security policy automation use cases that we have at hand. The first typical use case is group modification, and this is required because there are constant changes to the environment, which create changes to user and to firewall groups, and those changes are currently not properly documented in many organizations, and doing those changes manually is very confusing and complex, especially if you're in a multi-vendor firewall environment. The problem with such manual processes is that it takes a long time to deploy them. It increases the workload of your maintenance, and it can lead to human errors. What Tufin can offer in this case is an automated group modification process that helps you to create and maintain groups in a simple and accurate manner. And let's have a look of how this workflow looks like. So first of all, you can either create a new group or update an existing group by submitting a group modification ticket in Secure Change. Through the workflow, you can then design and provision the changes automatically using the Secure Change Designer tool, which is part of the workflow. And finally, you can ensure full auditability because you have a dedicated report and ticket history to document all these processes. Another typical use case is rule decommissioning, and this is required because security policies degrade over time, and so rules that were once required can be now fully shadowed or disabled or simply have no hits over time. And this creates the problem of a rule base which is poorly maintained. If you have many unused rules in your security policy, it may increase the attack surface and increases the overall complexity of your firewall maintenance. The solution that Tufin offers is the automation of the rule decommissioning process that allows you a complete change documentation as well. And let's have a closer look. So first of all, you will need to identify any obsolete or risky rules, and you will do that by searching the policy browser for those specific rules and then adding them to a ticket. So you can look at different rules that are obsolete, for example, rules with high permissiveness level. And once you select the relevant rules, you can add them to a ticket. You can then select the action and the Secure Change workflow and submit the ticket. In Secure Change, you can use the design and provisioning tools in order to provision the changes automatically. When you click the Update Policy button, the changes are provisioned to the devices. And then finally, you also have the full auditability via dedicated reports, as well as the ability to view the ticket history. And let's go over a third typical use case, which is server decommissioning. In this case, servers are sometimes no longer needed. Either they have been replaced or they have been removed from the network. But if you leave the unused server configuration in your policy, it can be very risky. And it's also very difficult to assess the impact of removing this unneeded server manually, because the implications can be quite complex. This is where Tufin offers the automatic server decommissioning workflow. It helps you to identify those unused servers, to analyze the impact of removing them, and to decommission them automatically using design and provisioning from Secure Change. And let's have a closer look at this flow. First of all, you open a server decommissioning ticket in Secure Change, and you can perform impact analysis to understand which policies are currently using this server. You can use then the design and the provisioning tools in order to automatically decommission the server from your devices. And as before, you can ensure full auditability via reports and ticket history. And back to you, Karen, to discuss some of the problems that are solved by security policy automation.
Thanks a lot, Hadass. So I know those are just a few of the use cases that you can use to get started with automation, but definitely starting small is the way to go. So let's talk for a minute about the benefits of security policy automation. So the first one would be, to really alleviate some of that skills shortage through automation. So because automation can help security teams spend less time doing the things that take them a long time to accomplish, they can ensure these things are done with fewer errors, and that means that they don't need to spend as much time troubleshooting or redoing tickets. Things are cleaner to start with, so you reduce that errors from manual mistakes and misconfigurations. You can see the statistic here from ESG in their survey. Respondents agreed that new types of security automation technologies would have a positive impact on their cybersecurity workload. That means that using security policy automation, you can do more with the existing resources that you have today. The second one would be compliance. Compliance is a key driver in security budgets. Compliance really forces organizations to really start thinking about policy and about how you meet those requirements and be able to prove those requirements. So security policy automation really helps you meet those compliance mandates with automated and fully documented security policy change practices. And then we have, the fact that you are eliminating these mistakes and misconfigurations because you're taking that manual process out of your everyday tasks. So you're able to improve response times, really improve security, and reduce the overall attack surface. So just take a short minute and talk a little bit about TUFIN solutions. The first thing I want to address is something that we call the maturity model. So at TUFIN, we use this maturity model to talk about the maturity of an organization, no matter if they are working from a point of zero visibility down in the lower left-hand corner, all the way to doing zero-touch automation. So no matter where an organization lies along that, we ensure your success in balancing your needs for business agility with the ability to ensure security and without slowing down your processes. So from our experience with some of the largest organizations in the world, we found that most organizations follow this pattern, and as they step through each of these steps, they're able to improve their operational efficiency and their security and really achieve that balance. And so we talk about managing a security policy everywhere. We feel like it's a really important to everyone's security strategy. And at TUFIN, we provide the steps from no matter if you're in a traditional network, private cloud, public cloud, even moving to microservices and containers, that we provide a continuum of coverage for the entire heterogeneous network to enforce your security policy across the entire spectrum. And all in all, the value is that you're now able to implement security changes in minutes instead of days, or in some cases even weeks. Reduce the complexity of managing your hybrid networks. You're able to visualize what you have, as well as automate policy changes, and then which allows you to ensure continuous compliance with your security standards. And so just take a step back to talk about the company we talked about in the beginning. So to show just some of the results that they achieved, they were able to remove from their network 389 network objects. They were able to reduce their rules by 2,000 by eliminating redundant rules. They were able to take out 152 security rules, 6 services, and 20,000 device configurations. Those results really provided them better visibility and tracking. They're able to see how many, in a year, how many unused rules have not been hit, or in 30 days, how many unused rules have not been hit. They can remove rules with confidence without impacting service, and they do that with an automated process. Once they've identified that a rule hasn't been hit in 365 days, they automate that process to remove that rule. So overall, they've reduced their threat landscape, and they've improved the firewall service. And, so to wrap things up, we want to just, talk about the future outlook, and that the network is going to continue to be complex and fragmented. There's going to continue to be traditional networks, private cloud, public clouds. We're adding containers and microservices, serverless computing. All of that is going to continue to fragment the network and add to the complexity. You have multi-vendor technologies and distributed teams trying to manage all of this. The network of the future is going to be software-defined, and it will be automated, and your security really cannot be managed at scale without a centralized policy with a single pane of glass solution. And with that, we are going to wrap up, and I'm going to take any questions. And I just want to remind the audience that if you do have any questions, you can type them into the BrightTalk console, and we will address your questions as they come in. So, Hadass, the first question I think that has come in is, what KPIs would you recommend using when moving towards automation?
Okay, thanks, Karen. This is a good question, as it's very important to define your KPIs so that you know that you're on the right track for success. So some of the KPIs that our customers are using are things such as the average change request processing time, and you would normally find that with automation, this average drops significantly. You can also look at the percentage of requests that have to be reprocessed due to various human errors, and you would expect this number to also drop, as well as the number of requests processed per person per day. Now, this is a tricky one because on one hand, you want people to be able to process more requests per day, but on the other hand, because there are fewer mistakes, eventually you would want to have fewer requests in the system, so you would need to look at this KPI carefully.
That's great, thank you. Next question is, which process would you automate first?
So it's good practice to choose something which is small and is a quick way for your organization. So you would normally select a process which is common or very frequent in your organization, and which is also labor intense, and something that can be easily automated. And some good examples for such processes are group modification or rule decommissioning, and we reviewed both these options earlier on the presentation.
Great, thank you. So I have a question. When creating and implementing a new rule, how does it look through the existing policy to determine if the requested access can be merged with an existing rule?
Okay. So when you're using Tufin to create a new access, Tufin uses a tool called Designer, which basically looks at the existing policies and determines what's the best option to create this new access using the existing rules, the existing group objects, and so on. So according to the available rules and objects, the designer will determine how it would be best to add the access. And after the designer is run, you are able to view the designer results, including all the new rules and the new objects that the designer created on the following screen.
And to add to that question, so part of that question was, do we just add a new rule to the bottom of the policy without checking for consolidation to create more policy bloat? And I believe Hadass just answered that, but we do check for the rules whether they're existing or if to eliminate that policy bloat. So we really want to make sure that you have a clean policy base and be able to eliminate those processes. Which stakeholders should be involved in the process?
Okay, so like any new process that you plan in your organization, it's best to have all the relevant stakeholders from various organizational departments and have them involved in the early stages of the process. When you select them, you need to make sure that both business people, such as application owners, as well as technical people, such as network administrators. And it's also obviously important to get the full management support from day one so that you know that you can continue smoothly with your processes. Great.
Next question is, we mentioned a reduction in SLAs, and can you give any examples? So I can take that one, and maybe Hadass can add to it. I know we have, and if you go to our website, you will see, we don't have it for download here, but there is a case study from RWE, which is a utility company in Germany, who is really gone to, they do pretty much full zero-touch automation in some of their processes. And, in the extreme case, they were able to reduce, they had 10,000 rules down to 900 rules by just doing some of the rule decommissioning process and eliminating those redundant and overused rules and unused rules. They were able to reduce their SLAs from about 2 weeks down to 2 hours on average, and took that even to being able to make changes within 30 minutes. So those are a couple of examples I have. Hadass, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that case study is available on our website if you would like to get more detail on that.
Yeah, so typically from customers, before they start using automation, obviously the average of the average duration of changes depends on the type of change that is required, but it moves between days to even a couple or 3 weeks for a single change, depending on the complexity and the number of people involved. And then after they deploy automation, it normally goes down to a matter of hours or maybe 1 or 2 days for the more complex changes.
Great. Another question is around being able to write your own scripts. It says, why not only use like open source scripts to be able to do your automation? So I will start to answer that, and I'll let Hadass answer. I think that, there are certain automation things you can do by writing your own scripts for sure. But we found organizations that are doing that they're very hard to maintain. If they have the person who wrote the script leave the organization and that script is not documented, they don't know why it was created in the first place, when it was created, who created it. So that becomes an issue in proving compliance, and it just becomes an issue of keeping up on those scripts and really being able to maintain, the automation. Hadass, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, that's very true. And also, one important part of the automation is the ability to audit and to document all the changes and all the various approvals in the process. So really to build a workflow that is fully documented. And I think that, doing this task using an open source tool is going to be very complex. And you would normally end up with scripts that can do some of the automation, but then you're missing the entire reporting and the auditing piece.
Excellent. So I think that's just about all the time we have today. Thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, please reach out to Tufin, and we will certainly try to answer any questions that we can if we have not answered them here today. Thank you very much, Hadas, and thank you all for listening today.
Thank you, Karen.